and we are recording this program. So if you do have to pop off for a moment, or if you know of anybody who wasn't able to attend, we will be sharing the recording later this week or at the beginning of next week. So do look out for that in your email, along with any other references that we go over or other information that we may want to pass along. So do look out for that. So yes, so please do mute yourself, and we're going to be handling taking all of the questions at the end of the program. But please, we don't want you to forget any of your questions. So you can use your chat, which is just right down at the bottom of your screen. And if you do have any questions or technical difficulty, please feel free to message me directly, Lindsay Carlson. And we also have on as well from Historic Sugartown, Faith McCarrick, who does handle she's the Director of Programs and Outreach over there, who's also going to be assisting with any tech related or Historic Sugartown questions in the chat as well. So now that we are through all of the sort of tech end of things there, we are joined tonight by Heather Reiffer, who's the Executive Director of Historic Sugartown, waving up there with Historic Sugartown in the background. And we also have Erik Hetzel, who's the Director of Land Protection over here at Willistown Conservation Trust. And to open this evening, we do also have another guest, Jim Garrison, and he is the President of the Chester County Historic Preservation Network. So he is going to open our program here tonight. I'm going to pass it off to you, Jim.
Hey, thanks, Lindsay. Just a few words about the network to get started. The Chester County Historic Preservation Network has been in existence for a little over 30 years now, founded by Jane Davidson and some other preservation stalwarts from the county. We're a nonprofit organization, primarily made up of the municipalities in the county, the historical commissions and HARBs and other township organizations, but we do have individual members also. Our mission is to connect local governments, organizations, and individuals in their efforts to protect, preserve, and promote the historic resources of Chester County. It was also my privilege to serve on the steering committee for Landscapes 3, the Chester County Comprehensive Plan. Landscapes 3 is the third iteration of the comprehensive plan that began over 20 years ago and has been highly successful in guiding the county in their efforts to really, as it says, plan for the future and not just let things happen. Landscapes 3, which is all online, you can see it at chescoplanning.org, and there are section digests and summaries, but the entire plan is on there also as a PDF you can also download. So I encourage you all to take a look at it. But I'll just give you a brief overview of what the plan is. It's divided into 6 sections entitled Preserve, Protect, Appreciate, Live, Prosper, and Connect. Preserve, Protect, and Appreciate represent an especially well-coordinated approach to our built and natural environment. And they build on the themes of open spaces and historic places. The public phase of Landscapes 3 generated over 66,000 survey responses and many public comments. So it got a very broad cross-section of the county involved while it was being written. The 2 highest priorities, is very interesting to me, I think to everyone, the 2 highest priorities during that public process were open space and the environment. And then a close second was preserving a sense of place. So you can see how important our place is to residents and to visitors. And so it becomes very important for us to manage the place. So the priority areas that correspond to the first three goal areas of Landscapes 3. The first one is preserve. And actually that one's about open space preservation. It's the protected areas of open space that include land trust properties, protected agricultural properties, and public parks and places. 27% of the county, the whole county land area, that's about 130,000 acres, is actually under some form of protection right now. So that's pretty amazing. But our goal is actually to exceed 30% and maybe get to 35%, because another 120,000 acres is actually still in parcels of 10 acres or more. So you can see there are a lot more opportunities out there. Preserving open space goes for active and passive uses, for parkland, for agriculture, hiking, activities. It's also important as a protection of habitats, but never forgetting that it also includes cultural resources. And so that is actually written into the plan now. The next section, protect, talking about the environment, and this was sort of news to me, was how important the protection of water quality is to almost everything that happens in the county. And so the protection of water quality comes about by stream bank protection and very much stormwater controls on property as well as roadways. Then finally, the section that started out as historic resources or historic preservation, but I think we gave a much nicer name to appreciate, really talks about how important our heritage is to understanding who we are. And that is how open spaces and historic places work together. They define us as residents, as people. They put us into a broader perspective of the cultural heritage that really is an inspiration for the future by making the tangible connections to the past. So Landscapes 3, and in particular Appreciate, goes well beyond looking just at buildings or objects, but it also looks at traditions, cultural heritage, and the stories that are attached to those. What we have to do by recognizing this is to promote those organizations that have it in their purview to manage these open spaces and historic places. And so one of the things we've done is to establish a heritage task force, which will be linking together the county planning department, the local governments, and our organizations, including Historic Sugartown, hopefully the Conservation Trust and our other land trusts, so that we can pursue our common mission of making this county, even more special than it is. Places like Historic Sugartown preserve some of the important characteristics of the county, and especially the crossroads villages, which are such an important part of our heritage. And in preserving these places, they keep the historic structures, but also the activities and the stories current and in front of everybody. And they keep these buildings and places in active, productive use. No one's looking to make everything into a museum, but to really recognize that we're part of a continuum. So I've really had the pleasure of watching Historic Sugartown grow over the years. I've, as an architect, had many projects out in Willistown and pass by often. So it's been great to see it come along, and now my pleasure to pass the program on to Heather, the Executive Director at Historic Sugartown. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. That was a great setup for a lot of what I'll be talking about, and I know what Erik will be talking about as well. I'm going to share my screen now with a our slideshow that goes with this. Let me bring that up. There it be. Okay. So when we had our, thank you again. My name, as Jim said, is Heather Reiffer. I'm Executive Director at Historic Sugartown, and I've been there a little over 8 years now, which I can't believe so much time has passed by. When we had our first meeting with Kate and Lindsay this winter, I think we were all struck by how much our organizations' histories mirrored each other in our mutual quest for preserving Willistown's historic and agricultural countryside. My task tonight is to share Historic Sugartown's preservation story. It's incredibly easy to fall down one rabbit hole after another when exploring Historic Sugartown's preservation efforts. The period when the buildings were actively restored stretched over 25 years, starting with the general store complex in 1982 and ending with the completion of the 1835 Hannah Cheever House in 2007. So for tonight, I will focus on Historic Sugartown's creation and its early efforts to preserve Sugartown's 19th century village corner. Uh-oh. For some reason, my slides will not advance, so I'm going to stop the share and try again. I apologize. Bear with me 1 second. I'm not sure this worked earlier, and for some reason, it doesn't want to play
Just gets
with me
frozen.
right now. What's that, Lindsay?
If you stop the slideshow and then start it again, that should re-kick it off.
Yeah, that's what I'm in the process of doing. So let me bring it up again.
And Heather, click in the slideshow on the screen. It might need to make that window active.
Yeah, oh no. See, I had this rolling perfectly earlier, and now it doesn't want to play.
We witnessed it.
Yes, I know
have
they did witness it. It wasn't just me. Gosh, why isn't this working?
This wouldn't be a Zoom call if everything worked.
That's right. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. So let me try this again. Excuse my screen, and there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Let's start with the earliest buildings. First, what was Sugartown? Why was it important to preserve? Following the American Revolution, Willistown was still largely remote. During those last 2 decades of the 1700s, the newly independent American people set themselves to work in establishing and growing the nation's economy. Trade grew, and that meant people were traveling. What is now known as Sugartown Road became a key thoroughfare, linking the new Lancaster Pike to Delaware County and beyond. Now, we all know what traffic is like on Sugartown Road today. Now, let's imagine it as a muddy dirt road, and the traffic was cattle, sheep, wagons of goods, and even wagons of fish. Now, can you imagine a wagon of fish going down Sugartown Road in July? I don't want to witness that myself. Shortly after 1780, the enterprising Jesse Garrett saw an opportunity with all this traffic and set up a blacksmith shop at the corner of Sugartown and Boot Road. The Goshen Monthly Meeting quickly followed suit, establishing a Quaker school and schoolmaster's house on the other corner in 1784. Then in 1805, Joseph Waterman built a saddle shop, a 2-story store, and a small home across the road from the blacksmith shop and the school. Now, this is now the part of the historic Sugartown's general store complex. But it was a tavern on the corner of Sugartown and Dutton Mill Road that literally put the village on the map. The building was constructed sometime after 1790, and different proprietors attempted to run either a store or some sort of tavern there. In 1801, Jacob Myers petitioned the Court of Quarterly Sessions for a license for a public house of entertainment. He ran the tavern, but was constantly dogged by the members of the Quaker meeting, who objected to the sale of alcohol and the public nuisance so close to their school. Jacob gave up in 1804 and rented the tavern to a man by the name of Eli Shugart. We don't know much about Eli, but we do know two things. He only ran his tavern for 2 years, and 2, they named the town after him. In his tavern license petition, Eli pleaded that at present there is no public house from the Black Horse Inn in Middletown, Delaware County to the Warren Tavern, a distance of 14 miles, and that he was much troubled with travelers calling, in bad weather especially. In a short amount of time, people began to refer to the corner as Shugart's Town, and you can see it there on the map. This is from 1830. So as implied by the distances, the village was the only place a traveler could eat or rest, get their horses reshod, or pick up supplies. Today we call this Wawa, I think. So Sugartown was born. Over the course of the 1800s, the village of Sugartown became a thriving agricultural community. Now, I mentioned earlier that Joseph Waterman built a store. This was the beginning for Sugartown's general store. Waterman's store had a slow start in the early 1800s as the family interchangeably ran it or rented it out. The store finally found consistent proprietorship when Sharpless and Abigail Worrell, seen here in this photo, purchased the property at a sheriff's sale on May 27th, 1847. The Worrells moved their family to Sugartown, and Sharpless reopened the store and became the town's postmaster. In 1851, Sharpless built the 3rd floor addition to the store building to create a meeting space for the newly formed local chapter of the Independent Order of Oddfellows. This was a civic group similar to the Masons, whose members supported each other in times of crisis, and they also had social events. Sharpless eventually turned the proprietorship of the store over to his daughter and son-in-law, Hannah and Hillary John, in 1874. As Historic Sugartown purchased the property from the John family, we are fortunate to have most of the store's day books from both the Worrell and Johns going back to 1847. As a result, we have a wonderful picture of who shopped at the John store, as well as what they purchased and how much items were. We're able to cross-reference these day books with the extensive research that John Nagy and Penny Golden did for Acres of Quakers, and from that, we know where some of these customers lived, what they did for a living, how many family members they had, and even in some cases, how many cows, sheep, and chickens they owned. General stores served as the center of community life in most towns in rural Pennsylvania, and indeed around the country. People would pick up their mail at the Sugartown store, sold their butter and eggs, and even order larger items from the Sears Roebuck catalog. In 1860, the Worrells constructed their large Italianate style home on the corner. By 1880, the Sugartown village quarter bustled with family and community life. Now, we discovered a couple years ago, as we were looking at the 1880 census, that there were 7 children under the age of 7 living in this complex of the Worrell and John's homes. At the time, the Worrells also had one of their daughter-in-laws and her 4 children living with them while her husband was working in New York City. So we kind of imagine the corner as an extremely busy place with kids running back and forth and asking the storekeeper for candy and so forth. And if you look closely at this photo, especially dead center underneath the tree, you could see a few heads popping up around the fence. And if you look even closer, you see other kids roaming the property in this photo. So in any case, it must have been a very busy place. The Johns ran their store until well into the 1920s. 3 of their 4 children, Clyde, DeWorrell, and Marguerite, operated various ventures from the property, including a contracting business. The store became most known for Worrell John's Antique Store. After his death in 1946, Marguerite ran a business for the time, and the property passed down to Beatrice Moore Huber. Beatrice was the great-granddaughter of Sharpless and Abigail Worrell. By the 1950s, Sugartown was beginning to look quite forlorn. Beatrice's husband, Frank Huber, would open the antique store periodically, but it had become one of those tumble down places where the antiques flow off the porches into the street. And you can see in this photograph, that's exactly what was going on. It was during a cocktail party in 1980 that the idea of saving the village of Sugartown was born. John and Peg Nagy, who lived in what had been the Quaker schoolmaster's house, were attending a party and struck up a conversation with then Willistown neighbor Penelope P. Wilson. When Penny realized where John lived, she exclaimed, "Well, you live right across from that sad, crumbling mess." Their thoughts quickly turned to how sad the old store and corner had become and how it must have been a lively place in its heyday. They agreed that something should be done. They stayed in touch, and a couple years later, Penny received a phone call from John. The Johns were ready to sell. With that came a flurry of activity. Early planning documents cite that after much deliberation as to the methodology, it was determined that a publicly supported nonprofit corporation would best serve as the vehicle to take title to the property and handle the restoration. In this manner, members of the community could become involved in the project, which would ultimately serve them as a neighborhood center and interpretive museum. Historic Sugartown, Inc. officially formed on March 24th, 1982, and it was on December 14th, 1982, that Historic Sugartown purchased the property from Beatrice Moore Huber for $175,000. Talk about your fixer-upper. To hear Penny Wilson tell it, they knew that they had a task in front of them, but they didn't quite know how big until they returned from the closing to discover that the Worrell barn behind the home had finally collapsed while they were at the meeting. So then the work began. Historic Sugartown initially contracted with John Milner Associates in March 1983 for the restoration and adaptive reuse of the buildings. A historic structures report assessed the conditions of the property and proposed a restoration strategy. The first task was to clear the contents of the old antique store from the buildings. Penny shared that she spent that first summer reuniting sets of china and glass that were spread throughout the buildings. Apparently, that was a security strategy of the owners, was separating collections, and they had to bring them back together. That fall, Historic Sugartown held an auction to unload what was left to raise funds for the restoration. And probably many of the folks who are here tonight may remember this auction that was going on. And I can also tell you that some of the remnants that did not sell in that auction still linger in the basements at Historic Sugartown. While initial cleanup work was going on, efforts were underway to have the village of Sugartown named a National Historic Register district. Willistown Township commissioned the Brandywine Conservancy to prepare the nomination through their historic preservation program. The Brandywine Conservancy is owed so much credit for Willistown's early conservation and preservation efforts. As Historic Sugartown's work was getting underway, the Brandywine Conservancy was already working with the Willistown Area Conservation Program on its road to establish WCT. And they were also working with Willistown Township to establish its historical commission. Ultimately, Sugartown was named a National Historic Register district in 1984. The preservation of Sugartown's general store complex continued over the next several years. Historic Sugartown involved the community by sending a questionnaire to 175 neighboring residents to ask their opinions on the building's proposed uses. In 1986, Historic Sugartown selected new architects, hiring Friends and Friends Architects in Westchester to complete the project. And I think Dale Friends may have joined us tonight. I'm not sure if he logged on or not, but if he's here, maybe we can snag him for some answer questions afterwards. The rationale for the restoration and adaptive reuse of Sugartown's buildings called for combined uses, balancing the creation of museum and public spaces with professional offices and residential apartments that would provide income for the organizations. These early decisions continue to guide our use of the buildings today. Then, as now, there was a great deal of fundraising for the restoration effort. Here's a photo of an auction catalog from 1992. You might recognize some of the names on here. You might even be on here. Historic Sugartown became known for its strawberry festivals and lobster feasts during the 1990s. And we have several of those hand-painted signs that advertise these different events in our stairwell, and you can see them in our building. Penny shared that she and John Nagy didn't always agree on aspects of the restoration project. When it was suggested that they would gut the second floor of what we affectionately call Building B, which features an 1890s bathroom, Penny protested. She felt that few historic sites preserved such spaces, and it was important to keep so people could understand the evolution of that particular part of daily life. Penny prevailed, and the Victorian bathroom remains a highlight of the preservation. Another memorable discovery was the well that is in what is now our visitor lobby. It was discovered while they were pulling up floorboards in that space. It was quickly decided that it must be preserved in the restoration. Now, we get a lot of questions about the well and how it's covered. So I included a photo so you can see. We had to remove the cover a couple of years ago to change the light bulbs, which I can happily say are now replaced with LEDs, so we don't have to do it as often. But now you could see down to the bottom, and you could see what it looks like when we have that lid off in the visitor lobby. Notice I'm not in the picture. Faith McCarrick is. I am not. I'm desperately afraid of heights. So yeah, I stay away from that. But it's an excellent feature and people love to look at it. The general store was later outfitted with cabinetry that Dale and Susan Friends found at an antique store in Adamstown. It was originally from the hardware was actually from a hardware store in Chicago, the cabinetry that is, and it fit our general store's interpretation well. The general store is furnished with artifacts, mostly from the Chester County History Center, as part of what has become an extensive collections partnership. So for the most part, the general store complex was completed by 1993. And here is a photo of the front, before and after. And there's the back. You can see how far they went. So, and here comes year 2000. Another whole program could and should be devoted to Historic Sugartown's second phase of restoration. In 2000, the DeFeo's property on the corner of Sugartown and Spring Road was available for sale, and Historic Sugartown feared that for that property's future. The decision was made to acquire and restore the corner. From 2000 to 2007, Historic Sugartown restored the barn, the Garrett House, which was moved over from Providence Road, many of you may remember that as well, constructed the bookbindery to house Fred and Elka Shahada's bookbinding tool collection, and finally the Cheever House, which involved a great deal of forensic architecture during its meticulous restoration. They did a lot of, had to recreate the stairs and the two spaces that I show here. In 2010, Historic Sugartown teamed up with the Chester County History Center to create the Carriage Museum. to exhibit their extensive collection of 18th and 19th century sleighs and carriages. It's one of the finest collections in the country of carriages and sleighs in their original condition. Finally, Historic Sugartown also stores 4.2 acres of land under easement with Willistown Conservation Trust, preserving part of the rich agricultural landscape that characterized the rural village of Sugartown. So again, why preserve Sugartown? Our connection to place is critical to who we are. Our communities, through historic places and landscape, provide us with a deep sense of rootedness and identity. So whether we're preserving a historic building or protecting a landscape, we play a critical role in providing a sense of belonging for our community. When gazing at that sad crumbling mess across Sugartown Road, Historic Sugartown's co-founder, John C. Nagy, didn't see a forlorn building, but the remnants of the once vibrant heart of Willistown. He and Penelope P. Wilson co-founded Historic Sugartown because they felt deeply that historic places serve as a bridge from the past into modern times. In the many conversations I've had with Penny over the past 8 years, she was emphatic about that last point. She was a steady and enthusiastic cheerleader for making sure that Historic Sugartown's preservation meant something. And I'm sure most of you are aware that Penny Wilson only just recently passed away in February at the young age of 97. We feel her loss deeply. You should also know that she remained an active participant at Historic Sugartown. At the time of her passing, she had planned to attend our board meeting that week and was ecstatic about the progress of our current strategic planning project. She would attend our programs and events, and just 2 years ago took 3 of Ramon Townsend's bookbinding workshops. Penny was nothing short of amazing. And John, though I never had the privilege to know him, would have delighted in the new activity today, particularly in the bookbindery, which was a love of his. Today, Historic Sugartown's board and staff are committed to the continued care of this special village and strive to ensure that Sugartown remains a vibrant, authentic setting in our community. We do this by sharing its rich history and creating meaningful experiences through our guided tours, our programs, our seasonal events, and other community events, and the workshops in the bookbindery. So with that, that is it for me. And now I'm going to turn things over to Erik Hetzel, the Director of Land Protection and Public Grants at Willistown Conservation Trust, who will share their corresponding organizational history. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Heather. It's great to see so many friends and neighbors out here tonight online. I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully have this good experience. Okay, we all see that? Okay. Again, as Heather mentioned, I'm Erik Hetzel. I'm the Director of Land Protection and Public Grants here at the Willistown Conservation Trust. And I'll be talking about the origins of our organization, how we've grown and changed over the years, and how those changes are setting the stage for where we're going in the future. Obviously, at Willistown Conservation Trust, we're more focused on the land resources than Sugartown is on the cultural and architectural resources, but really the two go hand in hand, and the preservation and conservation efforts that we're both doing really complement one another, and it's very much a synergistic type of a relationship. So the history of land conservation under the auspices of Willistown Conservation Trust spans the past 40 years, but really it's based in a conservation ethic that goes back many, many years before that. It's a story of generations of people caring deeply for the land with a passion for protecting it, not just for open space, but to preserve the rich natural resources of our woodlands, rolling fields, and stream valleys to benefit wildlife. It's also to welcome and share with people of all ages and backgrounds a deep connection with nature and the cultural history that shaped our landscape and the countryside. It's also the story that a story that could not have happened without the loyal support, both moral and financial, of so many people, for which all of us at the Trust are eternally grateful. These include many of the same people who supported the efforts of Historic Sugartown along the years and continue to do so. Some of whom are on the call right now that support both our organizations. Give you a sense of spatial context, our program area is an oasis of interconnected open spaces that has at its core an area originally known as Radnor Hunt Country. Today, it's defined by the headwaters of three creeks, the Crum, Ridley, and Darby Creeks. It encompasses all of Willistown Township and parts of East Goshen and Easttown Townships in Chester County, and portions of Newtown and Edgemont Townships in Delaware County. Overall, it's an area totaling approximately 28,000 acres, or almost 44 square miles. As a point of reference, you can see where Historic Sugartown is situated in our program area, right in the heart of our program area. So it's only logical, it just makes sense that we should recognize and celebrate the mutual interests and personal connections that bind our two organizations together. And that's why it's so great that we're doing this tonight. It's just building on the longstanding relationships that we've had. Our 40-year history at Willistown Conservation Trust can be viewed as really four important segments. The first being the early years that were under the umbrella of the Brandywine Conservancy in the early 1980s. In the beginning, it was the vision of our current executive director, Bonnie Van Allen, who's on the right of the screen there, along with her colleague and friend, Kathy McCoy, to apply the principles of land conservation that were being used at the Brandywine Conservancy, which was then under the leadership of iconic Chester County conservationist Frolic Weymouth. They wanted to apply this philosophy to lands in the Willistown countryside that were under threat of development. Alice Hausman joined the effort in 1985, and she's been integral to the success of our organization ever since, along with Bonnie. It was in these early years that the Willistown Area Conservation Program was established, which began the conservation projects that would eventually result in the creation of the Willistown Conservation Trust as we know it today. The second segment in our organization's history is marked by the official formation of the Willistown Conservation Trust as its own independent 501c3 entity in 1996. And this was with the blessing and encouragement of the Brandywine Conservancy. This is our first Board of Trustees meeting in 1996. And in the early years, the trust occupied the old blacksmith shop at White House Corner, which is the corner of Providence and Goshen Roads. They then moved across the street to the white building on the left of the screen, which was the old saddle shop at White Horse Corner. The blacksmith house is on the blacksmith shop is on the right. And then after that, we moved to our current office location in the farmhouse at 925 Providence Road, just south of White House Corner. This brings us to the third segment of our history, which is a period of vigorous growth in our land protection efforts through the early 2000s. We added land protection and land stewardship staff, along with other support positions. And at this time, we were still primarily focused on land protection, getting private properties under easement. This next series of slides shows the progression of our land protection efforts. The green areas are permanently protected lands beginning in 1979. In the next 10 years, by 1989, you could see the expansion of the protected lands. By 1999, and then in 2009, that's what it looked like. So it was also during this time that we were acquiring lands outright that would eventually become our preserves at Ashbridge, Rushton Woods, and Kirkwood Preserve. So it was the solid foundation of protected lands that set the stage for the fourth and the current era in the history of the trust. This period has seen the evolution of our robust outreach and research programs, starting with the creation of Rushton Farm in 2008. Under the direction of our farmer, Fred DeLong, the farm occupies 6 acres of tillable land at the Rushton Woods Preserve. The farm is a community magnet with community-supported agricultural operation at its core. The food produced at the farm is enjoyed by CSA members who support the operation financially, and many also volunteer at the farm. In addition, every week in season, Fred takes a truckload of food to the Westchester food cupboard. So we share a lot of our surplus for the public good. And underpinning all of this, the farm is an agroecology laboratory and a demonstration platform for innovating and testing sustainable agricultural practices. We use no chemicals on the farm. We have done pollinator inventories, and I can't speak to the numbers, but there's just thousands of different species of pollinators and bees and butterflies and moths. That the insect population at the farm is very healthy because of our sustainable agricultural practices. So our next program area I'm going to talk about is our bird program. Lisa Kijik, you see on the screen there, she leads our bird program, which really began as a banding station bird banding station that has evolved into a full-blown research operation. The program has become internationally recognized for sharing its valuable data about bird health, migration patterns, and the importance of habitat preservation. You can see our bird staff there. And there's Blake Gall with an owl. Next program area I want to talk about is our watershed program. This program is relatively new within the past 3 or 4 years or so. Director Lauren McGrath on the left there studies the health of our watersheds in our program area, the Ridley, Crum, and Darby Creeks. The information she gathers on the flora, fauna, and hydrologic conditions of the creeks is sent to shared regional databases to help paint a bigger picture about the health of our waterways, which are an important source of drinking water for the Philadelphia region. Our newest program is the Rushton Conservation Center, which extends our community reach even further. The building you see in the background, the red building in the background there, is a new addition to the Rushton Woods Preserve. It was finished in 2018 and is designed to host educational events, seminars, community gatherings, and farm-to-table dinners, all centered on themes connected to our mission of land protection and conservation. Lindsay Carlson, who you met earlier, is the program director at the RCC, and you'll be hearing a little bit more from her about our upcoming events in just a little bit. Finally, I just want to bring us back around to the theme of tonight's program, which is where preservation meets conservation. The growth of our organization, the expansion of our special programs hasn't changed our core mission of land protection. It's just a natural evolution that was based on that foundation. Just to bring you back, here's a snapshot of the progress we've made in the years from 1979 to today in 2021. That shows all of our protected lands. Now, as the Director of Land Protection, it's my job to get the remaining 4,000 acres that we've targeted under conservation within our program area. Those are the areas you see identified in pink on the map that we've gone through and very meticulously ranked using geographic information systems and qualitative and quantitative data to help us understand and rank which properties should be targeted for conservation. So I know it sounds very ambitious, but we're optimistic that with the support of our community, we can turn this map green, adding an additional 4,000 acres to our program area of conserved land. So as I said, I'm the person here at WCT that you would talk to if you're interested in learning more about conservation and how to be a part of this incredible movement and community. So I don't want to hold up the open conversation portion of our program here any longer. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it back over to Lindsay, who is going to continue the program.
Thank you, Jim and Heather and Erik, for, so much local history. It feels like we could probably make several parts to this program, really, moving forward. So keep an eye out for that future conversation. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat to ask, or unmute yourself, turn on your camera, say hello, and certainly ask our experts here anything that you would like. Anybody? All right. Well,
I'll say something. May I say something?
yes, please.
Okay,
By all
I'm
means,
Bob
Bob.
Wise. I'm an architectural historian, and I used to work for the Brandywine Conservancy. And one of the things we did with the Willistown Conservation Trust years ago now was to list Whitehorse on the National Register, where your headquarters was. So and I believe almost every building there is protected by conservation easement. You have both land preservation, you have building conservation happening right at that intersection, and it's probably one of the the finer historic villages in the area. So I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. It is a busy intersection these days, but one that we typically, when we welcome new people into the area, we do point out that this didn't happen by accident, that all of this
Nope.
historic properties, buildings, and land. Clearly, when you drive down into Newtown Square, you can see this is a lot of hard work went into this.
Right, and the National Register program, helps in the grant funding process. It gives you another arrow in your quiver, I guess, to go after grants. And I'm sure Sugartown's done the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is Bonnie. I'll put my video here. That was a great program. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Erik. And thank you, Bob, for mentioning the Whitehorse Historic District. There's also the Okahocking Historic District. So if you look at all of the historic districts that have been created, they almost connect and create this wonderful corridor of history that goes through all of our conserved lands. So, as both of you, Heather and Erik, mentioned, it's just so symbiotic, the culture and the land preservation, because one can't exist without the other. So it's been a great partnership, and more to come, right? Thank you. That was a great program.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you for
I
having.
see a question in the chat from Ramon asking, what are the primary criteria for identifying a property to preserve? I'm sure it's a little bit different in the village of Sugartown, and your area is a bit more confined, but I can say from the land protection perspective, we look primarily at the ecological values and other things, proximity to other protected lands. We like to expand areas of greenways and habitat extension. We look at, things like the presence of woodlands, wetlands, steep slopes, habitat areas that can be restored. And, also the relative threat that a property is under from development. We assess all of these things in ranking those properties that we want to preserve. I hope that answers your question. If you have any follow-up, please feel free to ask.
Erik, I wanted to build on that for a minute, because I think one of the things you mentioned is really important, and that's connections. And so it's not always a property that's big or better, or a building that is by itself, really special and historic. but it's how these pieces working together, like what Bonnie was saying, you know, creating the corridors and connections. It's all the little things that go into either telling the story of the place or preserving the character or preserving the environmental quality. So, you know, we shouldn't always be looking for just the gems out there, but it's what, it's the necklace. It's what holds them all together.
Eric,
Jim, I think, sorry, Bonnie, go ahead.
I just wanted to say how true that is, Jim. And Eric, you might want to mention, it was a perfect lead into our legacy easement program, where we've been working over a number of years on the smaller properties that connect and glue everything together. Do you want to talk about that, Eric?
That's right, yeah, and I was thinking the same thing. It was a great lead into that, because in our area, a lot of the really easy and obvious properties have been conserved. Now we're looking to close the gaps between those larger areas, and part of that involves finding ways to get smaller properties, properties and groups of smaller properties protected. And one of the primary ways, or the primary incentives for landowners to do conservation has been the income tax benefit that you get by making the charitable donation. And we're finding that a lot of the smaller properties may not offer that charitable donation because the value of that is based on how developable a property is. So we're finding ways to incentivize landowners just to philanthropically consider donations of an easement on properties that may not afford that tax benefit, but allows them to bestow the legacy of conservation on the community for generations to come. And as part of that, we've developed a new easement model that is a simplified model that conforms with all of the legal aspects of the Conservation Easements Protection Act in the state of Pennsylvania and other legislation that validates conservation easements and protects them from challenges. It's just that this model doesn't have the same rigor that is demanded by the IRS when pursuing a tax benefit. So we're trying to apply this model to many smaller properties in order to close these gaps of land that may not be protected under what might be considered a conventional conservation easement. And Bonnie, if you have anything to add to that.
I'd say the other incentive is that it gives the landowner of a smaller property the ability to protect the aspects of the property that they really love and want to see carried on into the future. You know, maybe a beautiful historic tree or a little stream valley that might go through the back of their property, or protection against future subdivisions should the zoning change. So it's really exciting, and it's giving an opportunity to a lot of people who might have felt kind of out of it because they didn't have a bigger property and weren't being pursued for conservation easements, but they can all be part of now of this whole mosaic of open space that we're trying to create in all the networks. So.
I think the same holds true. Sorry, my name's Faith McCarrick. I'm the director of programs. I know Lindsay introduced me earlier, but I was just thinking the same holds true. I think with some of our historic properties, they don't all have to be Monticello to tell an amazing historic story. And we are telling the story of, a small general store in a rural area outside of Philadelphia, and it might not necessarily come to someone's mind as, something big and a famous person or something like that, but we tell a story that is really meaningful of a lot of people who, history might have forgotten if you don't conserve and preserve the smaller buildings and the smaller, villages like our own. So it's hand in hand with preserving the small land, and then also the smaller historic touches throughout our land. So We also have another question. I don't know if either Heather or Eric want to speak to it in the chat. Can you, Jeannie asks, or Janine, sorry, can you both talk more about securing funding for the village building preservation and for land conservation, please? It can be an important model for others trying to do the same. That's kind of a big question to ask with a few minutes to go. But if either of you have a thought.
I should say, like, the initial restoration, I actually have the old restoration of the general store manual here. I don't know if you can see it with the picture in the background. That's throwing things off. But it's funny how things were raised. It's similar initially back in the 80s. I'm laughing because I think most of these foundations don't exist anymore, not in the same thing, but it was, again, local contributions, local, local community members, and then grants from larger places that initially funded preservation in Sugartown. I think, and now it's most, over half of our income is from contributions from the community. Very small amount of grants. And we also, we have, like I mentioned before, when Historic Sugartown's restoration was conceived, they planned for mixed use. So about 30% of our income comes from the office and residential rentals on the property. Now that brings a whole another set of implications of things we have to take care of on the property and relationships we have to, I'm a landlord on top of an executive director, for example. So, but having that mix, and especially this past year when, program funding just went out the window, that mix of funding sources was very critical to keeping things moving along all throughout the year.
If I could add about, from the land protection perspective, the other half of my job title is the Director of Public Grants. And so for some of our bigger and more important projects, we rely on grant money from Chester County, Open Space Preservation, and the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And we've used funds, well, in addition to many private funds that we raise as funding matches for those grant programs. So it was funds from those entities and private funding that helped us to acquire the Kirkwood Preserve, Ashbridge Preserve, and Rushton Woods Preserve. And we also, in Willistown, we're fortunate to have a very proactive township government that has, 20 years ago, they enacted an open space fund by referendum that uses a portion of the earned income tax that is levied on every household that lives in the community. That goes directly into an open space fund that can be used for open space acquisition projects. And we've maintained a great relationship with the township over the years to do partnership projects. They help fund the Kirkwood Preserve as well. And we have a partnership over at Okahocking Preserve where the township owns the land. We own one small piece of the land, but we hold the conservation easement on Okahocking. So it's been a great relationship there as well. So it's been a combination of those public grants and private funding that has helped us to do acquisitions and conservation easement purchases as well.
And again, if I can just add on to you, Eric, I seem to trail you here. I'm in East Pikeland Township, and we also have a set aside on our earned income tax for open space preservation. And it's been a real boon because it's money that can be used in matches. And so it actually gets multiplied. And if I return back to what we found in our public comment period during the Landscape 3 process, there was, huge approval and support for open space. And strangely enough, that can also translate into, through the referendum process, a willingness, to have an existing tax, increased and earmarked, or a new funding stream allocated. So, it's not as scary as a lot of people might think. There is support out there for it.
Great, thank you. And if we have time for maybe one more question here, if anybody would like to chime in. And again, I'll be sharing contact information for our presenters this evening with everybody afterward if any other questions come up. And you can get in touch with them directly, or hopefully come visit us soon. So that's the it's the segue into what's coming up next as we look to reopen both at Historic Sugartown and here at the Rushton Conservation Center. And just gonna share my screen here. So Faith, if you would like to talk a little bit about what's coming up this summer.
Sure. I know I'm not going to take too much time. I do want to thank you all for coming. And I wanted to say too, with the funding, I mean, just as an add-on, it all really comes back to the individuals too, who are willing to give their time, give their support, and give their funds to help conserve land, preserve villages. So really, I want to thank you all for just showing up tonight. You're saying you care about this, and we really appreciate that. And you're the reason we're here. So anyway, if you want to continue to support us and come to various things that we have going on or enjoy more virtual things, I've got 4 on the list here just to tell you about the upcoming things at Historic Sugartown. May is when we open our season for guided tours throughout the village. They're a little different with health precautions in place, but you get a intimate tour of our 19th century village. We're doing them on Saturdays at 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. and you can purchase tickets for those and have a fun Saturday tour of our 19th century village. We're also going to be Kimberton Whole Foods roundup at the register for June. So if you shop there regularly, you can just use that as a way to just add a little more support to Historic Sugartown by rounding up at the register, and you can get some wonderful food there and support a nonprofit at the same time. We have a beer garden coming back from 2 years ago now. We're finally coming back. Our first date this summer is going to be June 17th, 5 to 8 p.m. We are trying to bring it back in all of its glory with the Flying Dutchman, which is German fare. Malvern Scoops and Smiles is going to be there. And of course, Locust Lane Craft Brewery and Chad's Foreign Winery make it possible by providing the lovely beverages. And then finally, we have been able to continue our bookbinding workshops throughout this past year by turning a lot of them virtual, but we're doing in-person ones again in a limited basis, and we have some wonderful ones upcoming. If you've never marbled a scarf, you can join our instructor Ramon Townsend on July 10th and learn how to marble a beautiful scarf for yourself. And we've got other ones throughout the summer and into the fall and winter. So check out our website for upcoming events and programs like that. So that was it for me, but we can see you soon, either virtually or in person.
Thanks, Faith. And just a quick rundown of what's coming up. Our ever evolving events calendar is always available at wctrust.org. And on Friday the 21st, we are welcoming folks to have a picnic at the Rushton Conservation Center here for our community supper series. Typically, we partner with a local food producer or restaurant that supports local sustainable agriculture and regional agriculture. But this time we're inviting you to pick what you would like to bring and bring it out here with Deer Creek Malt House. We'll be here with their craft beer, and they're the only malt house here in Pennsylvania, and they're local. So it's even more interesting to talk to Mark about what a malt house even is. So look for that to reserve your place. That is a free or donation-based event coming up. And a tree planting. Please join us at Ashbridge Preserve. We are building up our riparian buffer to keep Ridley Creek healthy and our local watershed here. So you can sign up and come out with a group or your family. It's a great way to come out and get your hands dirty and watch a tree grow as you continue to visit Ashbridge. And last but certainly not least for now is our Willistown Barn Tour. Barns and Barbecue is back after taking a year off. And for the first time, we're actually offering a barn tour only ticket for the morning. So speaking of all of these wonderfully preserved, conserved lands and buildings we have around, if you would like an up close and personal tour, this is a really special opportunity to be able to do that in the morning of June 5th. And so please do check that out. We have 5 amazing private barns, private properties for you to come and take a look at. And if you are interested in attending we have a tailgate twist for our Barns and Barbecue dinner offer this year. If you are interested in more information about a ticket for that, please do reach out to me or our events at wctrust.org email, so we can be in touch about that as well. And keep an eye, we have cooking demonstrations we're going to start up doing here at our wonderful, beautiful kitchen, other mission-lined programming as well. So as a lot of our staff always say, there's a lot going on in the woods here, and it's alive and well, and our program staff is out, and volunteer opportunities on our website as well. So I will cut it off there. And thank you all so much for attending this evening. And we look forward to seeing you at Sugartown and here at one of our preserves or programs coming up. Thanks for the support.
Yes, thank you so much for coming out tonight. This has been a lot of fun.
It has.
And I'll see you, Heather and Faith, at the beer garden.
Very good. We're looking forward to it.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Okay, great program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.